What if I told you that 2025 is a perfect mathematical copy of 1941? I don't mean metaphorically or symbolically, I mean literally, down to the very structure of time itself. Every single date in 2025 falls on the exact same day of the week as it did in 1941. January 1st was a Wednesday in both years. Valentine's Day falls on a Friday in both. Easter Sunday lands on April 20th in both years. Christmas Day falls on a Thursday in both. December 31st will be a Wednesday in both years. It's as if time itself folded in on itself, creating an 84-year echo that defies our normal understanding of linear progression. This isn't some mystical coincidence pulled from numerology or pseudoscience. It's pure, verifiable mathematics that emerges from the sophisticated mechanics of how we measure time itself. But here's what's keeping mathematicians, historians, and intelligence analysts awake at night. It's not just the calendar that's repeating. When we examine the deeper patterns of history, economics, demographics, and geopolitics, we discover forces far more profound than mere mathematical coincidence. Dr. Neil Howe, a Harvard-trained economist who spent 4 decades studying historical patterns, made a discovery in the 1990s that revolutionized how we understand American history. Working with historian William Strauss, Howe found that human societies move in powerful, predictable cycles lasting roughly 80 to 85 years, approximately one long human lifetime. Each cycle ends with what they call a fourth turning, a period of crisis that completely reshapes the social order. According to their mathematical model, developed through analysis of over 500 years of data, we entered our current fourth turning around 2008, and it should reach its climactic phase in the mid-2020s. The last fourth turning? It climaxed in 1941 with Pearl Harbor. The mathematical precision is stunning. Revolutionary War climax, 1781. Add 84 years, Civil War climax, 1865. Add 76 years, Pearl Harbor, 1941. Add 84 years, 2025. These patterns have been incorporated into strategic planning by the Pentagon's Office of Net Assessment and the CIA's Strategic Intelligence Analysis. When multiple proven frameworks independently converge on the same time frame, serious people take notice. To understand how extraordinary this phenomenon is, we need to examine the mathematics. The Gregorian calendar, implemented by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582, operates on one of the most sophisticated timekeeping systems ever devised. It was created to keep our calendar aligned with the actual solar year, Earth's precise orbital period of 365.2422 days. This creates a persistent mathematical challenge. A standard year has 365 days, but Earth's orbit is about 5 hours, 48 minutes longer. Without correction, seasons would drift dramatically. Christmas would occur in summer within centuries. To compensate, we add leap days every 4 years, with exceptions. Years divisible by 100 aren't leap years, unless they're also divisible by 400. This creates a 400-year cycle containing exactly 146,097 days. So mathematically precise, it will remain accurate for 3,300 years. Dr. Charles Zeger of the U.S. Naval Observatory explains that within this cycle, calendar patterns repeat with mathematical precision, but perfect 84-year twins like 1941 and 2025 are extraordinarily rare, perhaps once every few centuries. But here's where it gets remarkable. William Strauss and Neil Howe discovered that major historical crises follow an almost identical 80-85-year pattern. They analyzed 500 years of Anglo-American history and found 4 distinct generational archetypes cycling through society in predictable sequences. Their research identified turnings, distinct phases lasting roughly 20 to 22 years each. The fourth turning is always a crisis, when institutional failure forces fundamental reconstruction. The mathematical precision is undeniable when mapped against actual events. Revolutionary War crisis, 1773 to 1794, 21 years. Civil War crisis, 1850, 1871, 21 years. Great Depression, W. crisis, 1929-1946, 17 years, compressed by global warfare intensity. Each resolved fundamental contradictions: independence from Britain, slavery's contradiction with democracy, America's global role. The current fourth turning began with the 2008 financial crisis, right on mathematical schedule. Historical patterns suggest the climax occurs 15-20 years into each crisis period, pointing directly to the mid-2020s. exactly when our calendar twins align. What makes the 1941-2025 parallel genuinely unsettling is how specific dynamics echo across the 84-year gap with mathematical precision. In 1941, America was bitterly divided between isolationists and interventionists, locked in political combat that split institutions and families. The America First Committee commanded massive rallies while President Roosevelt maneuvered to support Britain against fascist powers. Pearl Harbor instantly unified a fractured nation, crystallizing America's identity as a global superpower. The psychological shock transformed bitter division into collective determination within hours, a pattern that occurs during every fourth turning climax. Dr. Graham Allison of Harvard's Kennedy School has studied what he calls Thucydides' trap, when rising powers challenge established ones. His research in Destined for War analyzes 16 historical cases where a rising power reached roughly 80% of a dominant power's strength. Result: 12 of 16 cases, 75% probability, ended in major war. China reached exactly this threshold in 2020, according to IMF purchasing power parity calculations, 80% of US economic strength. This is the same position Imperial Germany held relative to Britain in 1938, and Japan held relative to Western powers in 1940. The mathematical precision is deeply concerning because we know what happened next. Professor Hal Brands of Johns Hopkins, who advises the Pentagon on strategic planning, has conducted detailed analysis showing current geopolitical tensions mirror 1930s-1940s escalation patterns with startling specificity. Today's U.S.-China rivalry follows the same sequence: regional tensions, Manchuria then, Ukraine now, proxy conflicts, Spain then, Syria now, alliance formation, Axis then, BRICS now, arms races, naval then, hypersonic space now. The technological parallels are equally precise. In 1941, the world entered the atomic age, computer age, and space age simultaneously, compressed by wartime innovation. Today, we are experiencing similar acceleration with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotechnology. Dr. Klaus Schwab calls it the fourth industrial revolution, perfectly timed with our fourth turning. Admiral James Stavridis, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, identifies identical military buildup patterns, alliance formations, and escalation sequences to those preceding major 20th century conflicts. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute shows global military spending reached 1940s levels when adjusted for economic scale. The economic parallels become mathematically precise through long-wave theory. Professor Nikolai Kondratiev identified 45-60-year economic cycles driven by technological innovation clusters. His research, later validated by Joseph Schumpeter, shows major disruptions follow predictable patterns driven by breakthrough technology implementation across entire societies. The last major restructuring began in the late 1930s, accelerated by WW2 mobilization, creating Bretton Woods, the welfare state, and American economic dominance. This system lasted exactly as Kondratiev predicted, until 2008's crisis began our current restructuring period, now accelerating toward mid-2020s resolution. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, $150 billion assets, conducted the most comprehensive analysis of these patterns, studying 500 years across Dutch, British, and American economic cycles. His principles for dealing with the changing world order demonstrates that reserve currency transitions happen every 75-100 years, following predictable sequences he calls the big cycle. Empires rise through innovative productivity, military dominance, financial center establishment, and reserve currency adoption. Then decline begins through rising debt, productivity decline, political conflicts, and challenger emergence. America is currently in late-stage dollar dominance, precisely where Britain was in the 1930s relative to emerging American power. Peter Turchin, University of Connecticut professor and pioneer of cryodynamics, mathematical modeling of historical processes, has achieved remarkable predictive accuracy. His models, published in Nature, predicted 2020's social instability over a decade in advance, treating societies as complex adaptive systems governed by mathematical principles. Turchin identified 3 variables determining social stability: elite overproduction, more educated ambitious people than the system can absorb; popular immiseration, declining living standards for ordinary people; and state fiscal crisis, government inability to meet obligations without destructive debt levels. His mathematical models show all three variables reached critical levels around 2020, creating what systems theorists call a perfect storm. Historical analysis suggests this instability intensifies until resolved through comprehensive institutional reform or social breakdown forcing fundamental restructuring. The mathematics are clear. Multiple independent frameworks point to the 2020s as fundamental transition, with 2025 emerging as the critical inflection point where these cycles converge. The technological convergence becomes supernatural in its precision when examined through innovation cycle theory. Dr. Cesare Marchetti's research at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis identified mathematical 50-year cycles in technological adoption. Kondratiev waves applied specifically to innovation patterns. Breakthrough technologies don't emerge randomly, but cluster together, followed by rapid implementation, market saturation, and eventual replacement. The timing corresponds remarkably to major social transformations and generational crisis periods. The last cluster emerged during 1940s crisis years. Nuclear power, electronic computers, jet engines, radar systems, and mass-produced antibiotics all reached practical application within years of each other. The Manhattan Project alone employed 130,000 people, consuming resources equivalent to the entire automobile industry, compressing decades of development into 4 years of wartime necessity. According to Marchetti's validated model, the next cluster should emerge around 2025, and the convergence is remarkable. Artificial intelligence now exceeds human capability in pattern recognition, language processing, and creative tasks. Development curves are exponential, with capabilities doubling monthly rather than yearly. CRISPR gene editing is entering clinical trials for inherited diseases and may soon enable human enhancement, potentially extending lifespan and cognitive capability beyond historical limits. Fusion energy systems are approaching net energy gain, unlimited clean power for civilization. Quantum computers are breaking previously unbreakable codes and solving problems that would take conventional computers longer than the universe's age. MIT's Dr. Erik Brynjolfsson, author of The Second Machine Age, documents how technological leaps create productivity J-curves, initial disruption, and apparent decline as societies adapt, followed by massive productivity gains as institutions catch up with capabilities. His analysis shows societies require 20-30 years to implement revolutionary technologies, with transition periods marked by inequality, social tension, and institutional dysfunction, as old systems break down faster than new ones emerge. We're currently in this transition, explaining the paradox of unprecedented capability coexisting with economic stagnation and political fragmentation. The Rand Corporation's classified analysis identifies AI as more transformative than agriculture, writing, printing, steam power, electricity, or nuclear weapons combined. Unlike previous revolutions unfolding over centuries, AI's impact will compress into years or months, creating change velocity that could overwhelm democratic governance capacity. Dr. Vernor Vinge's technological singularity concept, when AI achieves recursive self-improvement, consistently pointed to the 2020s through mathematical models developed in the 1980s. Recent developments in neural networks suggest his timing may prove remarkably accurate. The demographic mathematics add another layer of precision to this convergence. Strauss-Howe generational theory identifies 4 archetypes cycling through society every 80-85 years, with their interactions creating larger historical patterns. Millennials, born 1982-2004, represent a hero archetype identical to the GI generation that fought WW2. Hero generations are characterized by collective orientation, civic engagement, institutional confidence, and willingness to sacrifice individual interests for group achievement. They reach peak influence in their 30s and 40s, exactly where millennials find themselves in 2025. Dr. William Fry of Brookings Institution shows 2025 marks a critical demographic inflection occurring roughly once per century, the rising generation outnumbering the declining generation in leadership positions for the first time since the 1940s. Baby boomers, dominant for 4 decades, emphasized individual expression and personal fulfillment. Millennials, shaped by 2008 crisis, climate change, and technological disruption, focus on collective problem-solving and systemic solutions. This shift from individualistic to collective orientation historically enables major institutional reconstruction, like the mobilization that built post-war global frameworks. The University of Michigan's panel study of income dynamics, running since 1968, provides crucial quantitative data. Generational wealth transfers peak every 40 years, corresponding to lifespans and retirement patterns. The next peak occurs precisely 2025-2030, as baby boomers transfer assets to their children. The Federal Reserve estimates this at $68 trillion over 2 decades, the largest intergenerational wealth movement in history. But it includes more than money: business ownership, investment capital control, institutional leadership, and cultural authority accumulated during decades of growth and global dominance. Professor Jonathan Clements calculates this transfer, combined with different millennial investment patterns and values, will create fundamental shifts in asset allocation and economic development, aligning perfectly with fourth-turning transformations. Millennials show strong preferences for sustainable investing, technology, and social impact, exactly the priorities that emerge during institutional reconstruction periods. Their collaborative instincts and systems thinking prove essential for large-scale reform projects that follow social breakdowns. The timing is mathematically precise. Generational handoff, plus calendar alignment, plus economic cycles, plus technological convergence, plus geopolitical transition, unprecedented synchronization of change factors that systems theorists call a phase transition in complex adaptive systems. Dr. John Mearsheimer's research at University of Chicago provides the most sobering mathematical analysis of our current moment. His Tragedy of Great Power Politics documents how power transitions follow consistent patterns across 500 years of history. International systems become fundamentally unstable when rising powers reach 80% of dominant power strength. At this threshold, security dilemmas become acute and potentially unsolvable through normal diplomacy. The rising power seeks influence matching capabilities. The dominant power seeks to maintain privileged status through containment and alliance building. China reached this critical 80% threshold in 2020 via PPP calculations, identical to Germany's position relative to Britain in 1938 and Japan's relative to Western powers in 1940. Peaceful transitions are theoretically possible, but historically rare, requiring extraordinary statesmanship and often external threats forcing cooperation. More commonly, the result is hegemonic war, determining which power establishes rules and institutions for the next several decades. Allison's research found 12 of 16 similar transitions resulted in major conflict. Professor Hal Brands argues our situation may be more volatile than historical precedents due to fundamental ideological incompatibility. Previous transitions occurred between nations sharing democratic systems, market economies, and cultural values. The U.S.-China rivalry involves completely incompatible visions: liberal democracy versus authoritarian capitalism, individual rights versus collective harmony, open information versus controlled networks. Dr. Michael Beckley of Tufts identifies peak China, when demographic, economic, and strategic advantages reverse due to population aging, environmental degradation, and debt accumulation. His analysis places this inflection around 2025-2027, creating closing window dynamics. China may feel compelled to act on core interests like Taiwan, while advantages remain, rather than accept gradual decline. The military mathematics are equally concerning. Global military spending reached 1940s levels adjusted for purchasing power. Defense research acceleration mirrors pre-conflict patterns. Hypersonic missiles, space weapons, cyber capabilities, and autonomous systems developing simultaneously across major powers. Admiral Stavridis identifies identical escalation sequences to those preceding 20th century conflicts: regional tensions, proxy wars, alliance formation, arms races, then direct confrontation over core interests. We've completed the first 4 phases. The mathematical convergence suggests we're approaching what international relations theorists call a Kindleberger trap, when declining hegemons can no longer provide global stability, but rising powers aren't yet capable of assuming leadership, creating dangerous power vacuums. The convergence of these multiple independent frameworks creates what mathematicians call overdetermination, when different equations point to the same solution. We have calendar mathematics, generational theory, economic cycles, technological patterns, demographic transitions, and geopolitical analysis, all converging on 2025. Dr. Nassim Taleb, author of The Black Swan and world expert on rare events, has written extensively about how seemingly unpredictable events become identifiable when viewed through multiple analytical lenses. His concept of anti-fragility suggests systems under stress either break or emerge stronger, with transition points often predictable through pattern recognition across domains. The Santa Fe Institute's complexity science research identifies similar convergence patterns in complex adaptive systems. Their modeling shows when multiple cycles align, synchronization, systems undergo rapid phase transitions. Dr. Jeffrey West's analysis suggests human societies follow mathematical laws similar to biological organisms, with predictable growth, plateau, and transformation phases. MIT's System Dynamics Group has developed computer models simulating these interactions. Their World 3 model, continuously updated since the 1970s, successfully predicted many major trends. The latest version identifies the 2020s as a critical decision point, with outcomes heavily influenced by choices made around 2025. Professor Didier Sornet of ETH Zurich developed mathematical models for Dragon Kings, extreme events that are both consequential and predictable. His social, economic, and political system analysis identifies 2025 as having the highest probability of system-wide transformation in the next century. The predictive power validates these frameworks. Strauss-Howe predicted the 2008 crisis years in advance. Turchin's models predicted 2020 social unrest a decade early. Kondrativ analysis correctly identified 20th century technological revolution timing. These aren't retroactive pattern fitting. They're forward-looking mathematical models with demonstrated accuracy. When multiple proven analytical frameworks independently converge on the same timeframe, probability approaches mathematical certainty. The Pentagon's Office of Net Assessment has incorporated generational theory since the 1990s. The CIA uses Kondrativ analysis for economic forecasting. Central banks worldwide employ cyclical analysis for monetary policy. Dr. Ian Morris of Stanford, in comparative civilization analysis, identified social development cycles spanning centuries. His modeling shows we're approaching an inflection point, comparable to agriculture's rise or industrial revolution in transformative potential, centering around 2025-2030. McKinsey Global Institute's disruptive forces analysis identifies demographic transitions, technological acceleration, and geopolitical realignment, creating unprecedented change velocity. Their modeling suggests the next decade will see more transformation than the previous 50 years combined. What transforms this analysis from fascinating coincidence to genuine forecasting power is the demonstrated accuracy of these mathematical models. This isn't retroactive pattern recognition. These frameworks have successfully predicted major disruptions years or decades before they occurred. The Strauss-Howe generational model, published in The Fourth Turning in 1997, specifically predicted that America would face its next major crisis around 2008, lasting approximately 15 to 20 years with climax in the mid-2020s. The 2008 financial crisis occurred exactly on schedule, 11 years after their prediction. They also predicted the crisis would feature institutional breakdown, political polarization, economic instability, and generational conflict, all precisely describing our current moment. More remarkably, they predicted that millennials would emerge as the hero generation, leading institutional reconstruction, reaching their prime influence in the 2020s. Peter Turchin's cliodynamics models, published in 2010, predicted American political instability would peak in the 2020s, driven by measurable variables: elite overproduction, popular immiseration, and state fiscal crisis. His specific predictions included political violence, institutional dysfunction, and social fragmentation, all manifesting exactly as modeled. Kondrativ wave analysis successfully predicted the timing of every major technological revolution since the Industrial Revolution: steam power, 1840s, 1850s, steel and electricity, 1890s, 1900s, automobiles and chemicals, 1920s, 1930s, computers and electronics, 1970s, 1980s. Each cluster emerged during or immediately after major crisis periods, driven by accelerated innovation and institutional reconstruction. The current cluster, AI, quantum computing, genetic engineering, fusion power, is emerging right on mathematical schedule during our fourth turning crisis period. The pattern has held for over 200 years across multiple countries and economic systems. Ray Dalio's reserve currency analysis predicted the dollar's challenges based on historical patterns of imperial economic cycles. His model identified specific indicators: rising debt to GDP ratios, declining productivity growth, political dysfunction, and challenger emergence. All indicators reached critical levels precisely when his model predicted, around 2020. Even more compelling, these models don't just predict timing, they predict sequence. Fourth turnings always begin with economic crisis, progress through institutional breakdown and political polarization, and climax with external challenges that force fundamental reconstruction. We're following this sequence with mathematical precision. The technological innovation pattern is equally predictable: breakthrough discoveries during crisis years, rapid implementation during reconstruction, mass adoption during the subsequent high period. We're currently in the breakthrough phase, with mass implementation likely beginning around 2025-2030. Dr. Morris's civilizational analysis places our current moment at a singularity, a point where technological capability becomes so advanced that it fundamentally alters the human condition. His mathematical modeling consistently points to the 2020s as when multiple breakthrough technologies converge to create civilizational transformation. As we stand at this remarkable mathematical convergence point, the question isn't whether major transformation is coming. The mathematics make that virtually certain. The question is what form it will take and how we can navigate it successfully. History provides guidance. Fourth turnings, while disruptive, ultimately strengthen societies by forcing necessary adaptations. The 1940s crisis gave us the United Nations, NATO, Bretton Woods, the welfare state, and America's global leadership role. It accelerated technological development by decades and created institutional frameworks for unprecedented prosperity and peace. But it required enormous sacrifice and fundamental restructuring. Today's convergence suggests similar magnitude change. The institutions built for the post-1945 world are straining under 21st century pressures. Economic systems designed for American dominance must adapt to multipolar reality. Social contracts built for industrial employment must evolve for the AI age. Political structures designed for slower information flow must handle instant global communication. The calendar alignment between 2025 and 1941 isn't mystical prophecy. It's mathematical reminder that history moves in measurable patterns, and we're approaching a phase transition comparable to previous generational climaxes. The specific changes can't be predetermined, but the scale and timing of transformation appear mathematically inevitable. Dr. Klaus Schwab's Great Reset concept captures one vision: coordinated global effort to rebuild economic and social systems for the post-COVID, post-American dominance, post-fossil fuel world. Whether through managed transition or crisis-forced change, mathematical models suggest fundamental restructuring is unavoidable. But unlike previous fourth turnings, we possess unprecedented analytical capability. We can see the patterns, understand the mathematics, and potentially influence outcomes through conscious choice rather than blind reaction. The convergence of calendar mathematics with historical cycles provides a unique window of awareness that previous generations lacked. The millennial generation, now assuming leadership roles, brings collaborative instincts and systems thinking essential for navigating complex transitions. Their preference for sustainable technology, social impact investing, and institutional reform aligns perfectly with the kind of reconstruction that follows fourth turning crises. The technological tools emerging simultaneously, AI for complex problem solving, quantum computing for simulation and modeling, genetic engineering for human enhancement, fusion power for abundant clean energy, provide capabilities that could enable unprecedented prosperity if deployed wisely during institutional reconstruction. The mathematical convergence suggests we're not facing random chaos, but predictable transformation, following patterns that have strengthened societies throughout history. Understanding these patterns provides strategic advantage for individuals, organizations, and nations preparing for the changes ahead. The calendar twins of 1941 and 2025 remind us that time may be more cyclical than linear, that mathematical patterns govern historical development, and that apparent coincidences often reveal deeper structural realities. We stand at a moment when multiple analytical frameworks converge to illuminate both the challenges and opportunities of our historical moment. The precision is remarkable. 84 years after Pearl Harbor transformed America and the world, we face another transformation point where mathematical patterns, historical cycles, and technological capabilities align to reshape human civilization. The calendar doesn't lie. 2025 is our 1941, and how we navigate this convergence will determine the next 80-year cycle of human development.